All right, welcome back to the realm of history. Today we're taking a look at Chapter 17, Section 4, which is about how the Protestant Reformation continued to spread. One of the things that we'll take a look at first is John Calvin and Ulrich Zwingli with Roman numeral number 1. Calvin continues the Reformation. Capital A says Reform in Switzerland. The Reform in Switzerland, the Protestant Reformation there, was led by Ulrich Zwingli. He was a Catholic priest. He was influenced by the humanist ideas of Desiderius Erasmus and the reforms of Martin Luther. A couple of his big picture goals were to increase what he called a personal faith, a more personal-based, prayer-based worship with God, and he wanted believers to have a little bit more control individually of what went on in the church. The third major point here is that there was a war that broke out in 1531 with Swiss Protestants and Swiss Catholics. Next, we'll go to John Calvin at capital letter B. Calvin was from France. He was a Protestant from France. And in 1536, he published a book called The Institutes of the Christian Religion. In this book, he expressed ideas about God, salvation, and also human nature. He believed that men and women were both equally sinful by nature, and John Calvin believed that God chooses a select few people to save. He calls those people the elect. This is known as the concept of predestination. This is the doctrine or the teaching that God has decided all things beforehand, including who will be eternally saved or who will go to heaven. Calvinism, this religious-based faith, is predicated on the teachings of John Calvin. Next, we'll continue talking about Calvin here, in which he leads portions of the Reformation in Switzerland. Calvin believed that the ideal form of government was theocracy. Theocracy is where there is government that is religious-led, or there is a religious figure that is leading the government. Calvin was asked by groups of Protestants in 1541 to come and rule in their city of Geneva, Switzerland. Calvin accepted this offer and began to run a very strict religious-based city. In the city of Geneva, for example, some of the regulations that he put in play were like what colors you could wear in public. You couldn't wear any bright colors, like no oranges or yellows or light greens or anything like that. You weren't allowed to dance in public. Drinking, gambling in public were all not approved things that you could do. Next, the idea or ideology of Calvinism began to significantly spread. Another key figure named John Knox, who was influenced by Calvin, took his ideas and put them into play in his homeland of Scotland. The followers of John Knox are called Presbyterians. The strict teachings of Calvin were adopted by Swiss, Dutch, and also French reformers. In France, followers of Calvin were called the Huguenots. Huguenots and Catholics did not get along, and this relationship oftentimes led to violence. The most famous instance of this was the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, in which Catholic mobs began to hunt down and kill Protestants in France. Roman numeral number 2 is going to take a look at other Protestant reformers and other groups that led a Protestant-based faith. The Anabaptists are one. They believed that only people who were old enough to decide to be Christian should be Christian. They said that people who were baptized as children should be rebaptized as adults when they could then choose to be baptized. They believed that church and state, politics and religion, should remain separate. They were not fans of war. Okay, they were anti-violent. They were also groups that influenced other factions, such as the Mennonites, the Amish, the Quakers, and of course the Baptists. What sacrament of the Catholic Church is similar to the beliefs of the Anabaptists? That's confirmation. So you're baptized as a child, but then, you then eventually confirm that you do believe in the Catholic faith. Next, we'll take a look at the women's role during this time period. There was a famous female named Marguerite of Navarre. She was the sister of the King Francis I of France. We talked about Francis I earlier. He was one that called on Leonardo da Vinci to do some artwork. Now, Marguerite of Navarre protected John Calvin from being persecuted for his beliefs. There was also a female named Katharina Zell. We'll take a look at a primary source from her on page 498. Here's a primary source from Katharina Zell. Do you call this disturbing, the peace, that instead of spending my time in frivolous amusements, I have visited the plague-infested and carried out the dead? I have visited those in prison and under sentence of death. Often for 3 days and 3 nights I have neither eaten or slept. I have never mounted the pulpit, but I have done more than any minister in visiting those in misery. What she's arguing is that women do play a role in religion, and then they should be given a higher status, as they do play a big role in helping people who are sick or poor, so on and so forth. And she was accused of disturbing the peace by trying to do good deeds. Okay, back to our general lesson here. There's also Katharina von Bora. That was Martin Luther's wife. She agreed with Luther's teachings, but she argued with him about the role of women in marriage. Luther believed that women should stay and take care of the domestic affairs. Roman numeral number 3 is going to talk about the Catholic Reformation, or what is commonly known as the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Reformation is a movement within the Catholic Church to reform itself. Some of the important leaders of this movement was St. Ignatius of Loyola, Pope Paul III, and Pope Paul IV, who all made moves to basically rectify some of the problems in the church. Capital C refers to Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius of Loyola is the founder of the Jesuit Order of Priests. It's a religious order founded by Ignatius that focused on 3 activities. Number 1, education and founding great schools throughout Europe. Number 2, converting non-Christians to Catholicism, so going out and doing missionary work. And then number 3, stopping the spread of Protestantism by gaining more Catholic converts. Capital letter D, we're going to talk about some of those popes that were mentioned above. Pope Paul III directed the Council of Cardinals to investigate the sale of indulgences, which was a major problem that led Martin Luther to pound the 95 Theses. He approved the Jesuit order. He used the Inquisition to seek out heresy in papal authority. He also called for something called the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent was a group of church leaders that met in northern Italy. Some of the things they agreed upon can be found in the textbook on page 499. Let's take a quick look at that. Here we go. 1. The church's interpretation of the Bible was final. Any Christian who substituted his or her own interpretation was a heretic. Christians needed faith and good works for salvation. They were not saved by faith alone, as Luther argued. The church and Bible tradition were equally powerful authorities for guiding Christian life. Indulgences were valid expressions of faith, but the false selling of indulgences was banned. Then Pope Paul IV continued to uphold what the council agreed upon, but burned all books that were listed on what was called a forbidden index. What was this index? It was a list of books that were found to be heretic or heretical by nature, or went against the teachings of the church. Roman numeral 4 talks about the true legacy of the Reformation, the religious and the social effects. A couple of things to think about here. Protestant churches began to flourish and new denominations developed. Roman Catholic Church and its followers became more unified due to the Council of Trent. Education for church leaders became an emphasis for all denominations. And the political effects. As the power of the Catholic Church declined, the monarchs and states began to gain power. We also saw the development of nation states. Nation states are groups of people that have a common culture and identity. We'll take a look at this later, as it's going to play a very important role in our future lectures and discussions. Thank you.